Shumitra was a Brahmana. So why do you call him an Anarya? Not in ethnic sound, but it's an ignoble act. Nothing to do with what we perceive as an ethnic level, never. So that is something I would like to point out. And as you know, the Vedic texts, these are our only source, barring some case of the Gangarograph culture, or sometimes with the later Vedic, maybe coeval with what is called the PGW culture, even earlier the OCP culture in the Upper Ganga Valley, Ganga Yamuna plain. But the bulk of the material comes from the Rig Veda and the other later Vedic texts. The point is that the Vedic corpus is essentially an oral literature. That's why, since there is no writing of the Rig Veda, you don't require any critical text of the Rig Veda. You don't need it. In the case of Mahabharata and Ramayana, you need that. So, as Michael Witzel told that if someone perfectly recites the Rig Veda according to the meter, it would appear like a tape-recorded recitation made 3,000 years back, if it is rightly pronounced. It's retention, that's why Shruti. That's why Shruti. And many words, this is another problem with many field archaeologists nowadays. They suddenly jump into quoting Sanskrit words without at all understanding what is meant by the Sanskrit word. Take for example the word Sangbad, which is a perfect Tatsama word, a Sanskrit word, means news. In that case, the famous case of the Rig Veda is the Yama Yami Sangbad. Are the two brothers sisters reading out news for us? The term is dialogue. That's why Rabindranath used Karna Kunti Shobha. So the words may remain the same, but its meaning and context can change radically. The other very typical case is Samant, which is normally a dependent, so-called feudatory ruler under an overlord. From 4th, 5th centuries onwards, this is the standard meaning. The term first appears in Arthashastra of Kautilya in the sense of a neighboring ruler. Anta, Sa Anta. Once a ruler's next to his frontier or Anta is Samant. So the word remains what I call in Bangla, I do not know what is happening with the Bangla teaching nowadays at the school. In our grammatical passages for the second paper, unseen paper, the grammar portion had some examples of what was called Samoccharito kintu bhinnarthak shabda. It is exactly like that. Meanings change, meanings morph. So morphing of the meanings is absolutely classic. In the Rig Veda, the entire Vedic corpus is sacerdotal literature. The Rig Veda is a remarkable text of its vibrant, close to life. There are wonderful hymns in praise of different divinities, more from mundane needs of life, victory in the war, booties like kine and cattle, birth of male children, long life. These are very mundane desires for which Rigvedic seers were composing poems, often in the form of stutis. And this kind of full of mundane poems you have. That's why I recall none other than Mahamahopataya Haraprasad Shastri once jokingly but perhaps rightly pointed out Rig Veda was, in his own Bangla term, Rakhali Kappu. That was his remark, Rakhali Kappu. And the simple, direct, robust. But in that also comes, I'll only mention two cases, what may be called now celebrated as a radical doubt. This is there in the Asabhamya Sukta and also in the Nasadya Sukta. Who knows with definite certitude? This is the beginning of knowledge. Knowledge will always embrace uncertainties. Moment one comes to certitude, it's end of knowledge. And the Rig Veda is particularly the two cases. If I may interject, I read 2 days back the release of a new book called The First Radicals in India. This is a book written by Rasinka Chaudhary of the Center for Studies in Social Sciences. She is also a director, a wonderful scholar of English literature. By the first radicals, he's starting with Derogio and the young people. Fine, no problem. But if radicality stems from the radical doubt, I would put the 2 creators of Asabhamya Sukta and Nasadya Sukta as the first radical, at least in literary terms. Not suddenly 19th century Bengal. However, our great fascination from Bengal Renaissance. So, I would briefly pause here. That from the Vedic, now always you hear about the Vedic situation. From the early Vedic to the later Vedic, there is a remarkable change of hugely ritualistic cult of sacrifices. And naturally, the rise of the priestly group, the Brahmins. Those people nowadays, particularly even in school textbooks, NCRT and others are telling that Varnajati system really was only there in a flimsy situation in the ancient times. It only became much more rigorous, and the sharp differentiation ranking and the vertical ranking is essentially of a much later times, when the Varna society degenerated, often by external causes, not by internal situation. Complete bunkum statement. In the later Vedic text, you look at the Shakavata Brahmana, you look at the Aitara Brahmana, many other texts, where particularly during the time of the major bloody sacrifice, Ashwamedha, Vajapeya, Rajasuya, Indra Mahavishya, particularly during the Vajapeya sacrifice, the ruler for whom the sacrifice is being made, he is being called Vishwasya Bhutasya Adhipati, Lord over all beings in the world. Then his position is the Vaishya is considered as the grass, as barley, yava, and the ruler is deer. What does it mean, the opposition between a devourer and the devourer? Is it a very simple, very homogeneous society? And the epithets used for, even in the Uttara Brahmana, it's written from the point of view of Kshatriya, the ruling group. The Brahmana is considered as Annasya Adya, someone waiting upon someone, Somapayi, drinker of the somas. And then the 2 lower orders, the Vaishya is considered categorically is Yathakama Preshya, who can be oppressed at will by the Kshatriya. For the Shudra, it is even worse, Yathakama Vatya. Is it a very stable, very homogeneous society, living in peace? And this is something I am repeatedly, India is a very peaceful country. It is non-violent. Is it a case of non-violence? What does the culture, the kind of sharp difference, the hatred, and the insiders are turned outsider. This is the hallmark of the Varnajati system. And one of the most important point of this model, it's not merely for who stands where, it also emboldens the grip of the patriarchal society from the later Vedic period onwards, and then in the Dharma Sutras, Grihya Sutras, then the Dharma Shastras. The constant tendency towards lowering the age of marriage of women. Preferred to be married off at the pre-puberty stage. For them, no Vedic studies. Yes, you will immediately talk of Apada Vishwabara Ghosha, about whom Shukumari Bhattacharya made us conscious that there were women in the time of the Rig Veda, perhaps also a little bit in the later Vedic times, who were Brahmavadinis and were composers of Vedic hymns. How many? And even more than that, if we talk about the Upanishads, which for the first time made a radical departure, at least very sharply criticized the ineffectuality of the cult of sacrifices. I recall the statement from the Mandukya Upanishad that very interestingly, let me put it here, sorry, it's not there, let me see. Please see this, Mandukya Upanishad's famous line, Tvabahi ete adrida yajna rupa. An infirm, leaky boat is compared with the metaphor of yajnas. As yajnas are often ineffectual, a leaky boat is like that. This is the critique coming from, and I'm not getting into the Upanishads' many interventions into the cult of what is called the karma. And even when women are occasionally raising voice, there is always that clause of Mati Prakshi. Don't ask a question beyond your limit. This was the thread Gargi received from Yajnavalkya at what is described as the Brahmadya, kind of seminar regarding who knows the Brahman, who excels. The most excellent will be seen as Brahmishtha. Yajna was coming from that, and the debate with Gargi was could have proceeded, but with this threat of Yajna, Mati Prakshi. Do not go further with your questions. This Mati Prakshi is the debarring clause, repeatedly coming. Okay? This is the time with the early historic phase, as I said, the common idea that field archaeology is merely for the pre-literate period is thrown out. Because without the field archaeological materials, it would have been impossible to understand the nature of the second urbanization, with its primary focus in the North Indian plains, right from Gandhara area to the area around Champa in Anga, and not beyond the Vindhyas. It's interesting in the distribution of the Mahajanapadas and the premier urban centers of the time of the Buddha will more or less match in the geographical spread. And it is known largely from field archaeological materials. Some cities could be identified with what is there in the Buddhist texts and Jaina texts. Some cities like Authenticera, like No. Two massive sites known for its rich iron artifacts cannot be categorically identified with a literary account. Once again, the distinctiveness, two sets of sources, not always matching. And it's only with the specificity of the field archaeological materials, like the structures, the dwelling structure, where there is mud brick, where there is the use of burnt brick, the ratio between what may be called a highway in say Taxila with its alleys and the bylanes, how does it stand? Everything is it planned, at least the shape of, say, Shravasti, it looks like a crescent. While, as I can point out here, the ground plan of Ujjaini here is almost like a rhomboid. So there is no plan. structure of the layout. What is interesting once again is that this urban society, urban culture is very much close to all the renunciant thoughts and their leaders. The Buddha, the Mahavira, the Mokkalibuddha, Gosala, the Charvakas, all would prefer urban centers, at least close to urban centers, rather than rural areas. We don't recall that the Buddha or Mahavira or Mokkalibuddha Gosala is preaching in a very remote village. They are always close to urban areas. And they prefer urban audience. While in the, I think it's called Ranabir, where there is an injunction is being made that if a Brahmana goes to a city, then it meets with expiation, prayashchitta. Because in the city there is permanent anadhyaya. Now the term anadhyaya means non-reading. Non-reading of what? Non-reading of Vedic scriptures, which then means the urban centers are seen almost as an emblem of something not approved in the Vedic culture, Vedic ideology. That's why the importance of the Nastika school. The term Nastika does not mean atheist. Those who do not ascribe and accept the infallibility of the Vedas and the primacy of the Brahmins, they are considered the Nastikas. That's why the Sankhya, which is philosophy which does not accept God, but accepts the primacy of the Vedas, the Shruti, they are not Nastikas. So, once again, this is the change of the meaning of the same term. Nastika is now seen in the case of an atheist, never earlier in that situation. As you know, this is the time also when the Panchmark coins for the first time, and really, I don't know if Shushmita is there, and once again I'm a little scared to talk about coins in our presence. And these were in circulation up to 1st century BC, and most remarkable, these are non-dynastic, uninscribed coins. We are mostly familiar with the dynastic coins with the image and legend of the ruling authority. It is nothing like that, yet with a very wide circulation, particularly from the 3rd century BC onwards, most probably, possibly issued by the Mauryas, though there is no categorical legend of the name of Ashoka, Chandragupta Maurya, or even any particular dynastic symbol. This is also the time, as we know, the first beginning of epigraphy. But epigraphy, with the Ashokan times, I'll take you to Behistun. This is the site of Behistun. It's on a very high cliff. The present name Behistun comes from the Iranian word Bhagastana. Bhaga is something like Bhagavan, Lord. The sacred space for the divine beings. Bhavasthana then becomes Behistun in English of Behistun. Now here you can see inscriptions were engraved in 3 languages, simultaneous, of which there is Old Iranian also, mostly which reach us, like Darius's Shkhayatiyanam, and this kind of statements. The other 2 are Akkadian and also Elamite. And then it accompanies visuals. This is Darius showing